Okay, a lot of you are here for CMEs. We have a partnership with New York Medical College to give CMEs as well as host these programs. So if you would kindly log in to the EEDS system through the text code 828-295-1144 or eeds.com and sign in your attendance. That will also allow you to get your CMEs. This must be done before tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. So you have 24 hours to be able to do this. Melissa Elliott and Elizabeth Speck have no relevant financial relationships to report in the last 12 months with a commercial interest. This activity is not commercially supported. So I want to start by thanking our colleagues at Vibrant Emotional Health. We've been doing a series of 4 programs with Vibrant. They are formerly the Mental Health Association of New York City. Vibrant Emotional Health groundbreaking solutions have delivered high quality services and support for over 50 years. So you might have heard of them. I'm sure you have. Through their state-of-the-art technology enabled services, their community wellness programs, and advocacy and education work. They are building a society in which emotional wellness can be a reality for everyone. And they have a state reach, a city reach, and a national reach through their National Suicide Lifeline. So I'm very excited to talk about our presenters today. Elizabeth Speck is the founder and principal of Mind Open Learning Strategies, a training, consulting, and coaching firm that helps people and organizations learn new ways to work in order to better serve social justice. Licensed creative arts therapist, Elizabeth has worked within and across New York City's complex public service systems in direct service management and capacity building for 25 years. You don't look that old, Elizabeth. Her own experience with vicarious trauma and burnout ignited a passion for building health and equity in the workplace, leading to earning a doctorate in organizational development. And then our second speaker is Melissa Elliott, who is a not-for-profit leader, an adjunct professor, and a psychotherapist in private practice. Melissa holds a master's degree in social work from NYU and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a minor in African and Latino history from CUNY Baruch College. Her experience as a Black Barbadian American woman impacted by racism in her community has shaped her resilience and drive to create restorative environments that support the stability of communities of color. She's motivated to continue to build an atmosphere where people of color are healed by the pressures and impacts of racism and provided with tools to navigate the multiple systems of the interlocking oppressions. So I will leave you in these good hands. Take it away.
Thank you, Tuhina. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vibrant, for partnering with us and welcoming us today. I'm going to put the poll back up here. We'd just love to have you interact a little with us to start, knowing that you're participating today probably from a variety of places and in a variety of ways. So we're going to keep that up there and just share a little bit with you about what has brought us to you today. Tuhina, thank you for the, I guess, observation, but this is the wonders of Zoom and the filters. For the nearly 30 years that I've been working in New York City Human Services, I have always gravitated towards the work and the environments that many people and professionals avoid, such as psychiatric hospitals and prisons and jails. And my passion and my mission is around humanizing, dehumanizing systems. Yet for the first third of my career, I didn't have any framework for understanding trauma. It wasn't until I went to graduate school and got some clinical training that I got some language and support around the impact of vicarious trauma and about understanding the impact of trauma on behavior. And I don't think you should have to go to graduate school to get those kinds of tools, because throughout our communities and the communities that we work in, there are folks on the front lines who may or may not hold particular titles, who are really the frontline responders to trauma. And so I'm sort of on an evangelist for getting these ideas into our everyday conversation. And I am so excited to partner with Melissa Elliott today, with whom I have had the pleasure of doing some of this work in our systems.
Yes. Thank you so much, Tahina, and to Vibrant, and to all those who are online right now. I'm pleased to be with you all this morning and early afternoon. I'm a social worker, and for over 10 years, I've worked in nonprofit industries, both as a worker and a senior leader, ranging from child welfare to outpatient mental health, workforce development, and most recently as an adjunct professor and in private practice. And, you know, my experience, we've all experienced vicarious trauma. It's important to recognize it in ourselves, in others, and find out how we can collectively offer support to do the work we love to do. And to, thank you.
I just have one request. If everybody could put themselves on mute unless you're speaking. You can unmute at any time if you would like to ask a question or share something with us. And Melissa, could we see your face a little bit more on the projector? Yes, I couldn't see your whole face. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for taking part in the polling. We're gonna close it and share it. So just recognizing we come with a variety of intentions, and noting that the most respondents are hoping to learn new tools for coping today. We want to be really real. There are no silver bullets. We are in this together, and we thank you for being here, for taking this time for you and to share your perspective, as well as to learn from colleagues. What we're looking at today during our time together is spending a bit of time in true trauma-informed spirit, setting the stage, letting folks know what to expect, and then we'll focus on the idea of resilience and personal definitions. We'll take a look at the unique characteristics of compound and complex trauma and link that into making sense of vicarious trauma, an inevitable and human response to being in the helping professions. We'll take a self-assessment, and that will be for your knowledge and information. We will not today be asking anybody to share anything personal that you don't wish to. And we'll be leaving with resources and tools. So overall, our goals are, again, to bring this even more into the consciousness. We know that some of you may have been participating in the last couple of trainings. Melissa and I will also be seeing some folks again in a couple weeks around bringing vicarious trauma discussions into supervision. So excited about that. And overall, building a culture across our institutions, our organizations, our city for self-compassion among our professionals and clinicians, and mutual support. So again, reinforcing trauma-informed principles. Trauma takes away our sense of control, our sense of safety. A key tenet is voice and choice. So even today, we want to encourage everyone to practice that. Please participate in the way that is right for you right now. Again, we know you may be walking somewhere, you may be on a phone, you may be at your desk. We will be throughout this day inviting your participation. They are invitations. We hope that you might share your thoughts in the chat if that's something that is convenient for you, or that you might unmute yourself and let your voice be heard, or that you are listening, and that is also a way of participating. If you can, we hope that you will hydrate, get what you need near you. We will be providing handouts and a PDF of this PowerPoint, so there's no need to take down notes. And please listen to yourself and your body and what you need right now.
So I want to take this time to have an excerpt from the Letter to a Young Activist by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I would like to take your hands for a moment and assure you that you are built well for these times. Despite your stints of doubt, your frustrations, and all writing all that needs change right now, or even feeling you have lost the map entirely, you are not without resource. You are not alone. Look out over the prow. There are millions of boats of righteous souls on the waters with you. In your deepest bones, you have always known this is so. So I just want to take this time to welcome you all into this space. This moment right now, we are living through a collective trauma. And each of us in our communities, in our families, we are also carrying layers of our varied and deep histories of survival. The same stress responses that have kept us alive can take a toll on our brains and our bodies over time. Trauma symptoms are normal responses to abnormal circumstances. I would like for you all, if you are sitting, if you are standing and walking, to just take some time to pick a comfortable space to sit and rest. If you choose to, close your eyes, or you can also keep them open. I want you to take a deep breath in through your nose, filling up your lungs, and exhale, forming your lips as if you are drinking through a straw and blowing it out. Inhale once again through your nose and out through your mouth. Continue to take deep breaths. I want you to start with each of the senses individually. Feel the surface underneath you. If you are sitting, feel your lower bottom on the chair. If you're standing, ground your feet into the ground beneath you. What parts of your body is making contact with the ground? The temperature on your skin, where your body is placed in the space. Continue to take a deep breath in and breathe out. Now I want you to shift to taste. Notice the taste in your mouth. Relax your tongue. Deepen your breathing. Then I want you to notice the sensations of your smell. What do you distinguish? What details do you pick up? Begin to notice the sounds around you, those that are close to you and those that are far away. Listen to the nuances. Listen to the world as it goes on. Tune into the sounds of your own breathing. Lastly, touch. Gently place your hands on your knees, on your shoulders, or any part that needs to remind yourself of your presence. Whether it's hugging yourself, holding yourself deeply. Continue to breathe. And slowly, when you are ready, open your eyes, Take in the details of the room you are in. Look up, notice the ceiling, look to your left, notice what's over your shoulder, come back to the center, look to your right, notice what's over your shoulder, come back in. Try to just observe without judgment. Incorporate the feeling of your whole body at rest with your visual reality and breath. Thank you. I would like to now invite you to share in the chat box, what does resilience mean to you? Elizabeth and I will let you know what resilience means to us as you fill in the chat box. Elizabeth?
Personal definition of resilience: connection, being able to relax and let others take over. I think that's a very different definition than I had earlier in my career, when it was more about how much could you take, right? How tough could I be?
Yeah, and for me, resilience is about realizing that sometimes I don't have anything else but to bounce back, and to know that moving forward is all that I have to do, both for myself, for my family, and for others. And so this idea of bouncing back or pushing through is what I've been holding on to as a personal definition of resilience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tuhina. This too shall pass. I'm not alone.
Yes, thank you.
There's no right or wrong here. Any, first words that come into your mind.
That's right. Knowing that feelings come and go, no matter how difficult. Yes. I do also want to say that during COVID-19 and the increase of racial violence on Black and Brown bodies, we have experienced primary trauma and vicarious trauma, whether it was dealing with our lives being forever changed by this global pandemic, or watching the horrific video of George Floyd killing on TV, or dealing with the multiple deaths of those killed by COVID-19, or seeing the faces of loved ones who have lost someone to the virus. We have all had to recover, bounce back, not only for ourselves, but our colleagues, our loved ones, and our patients.
Thank you. And then,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what did you notice in your thinking about what resilience means to you?
Please feel free to unmute or to type in the chat.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about how often the way people describe resilience is around bouncing back, and that can be kind of a yes and, because it's not about just having an individual fortitude to come back from circumstances that shouldn't be happening in the first place, or are too common or too much of a barrage than they should be. So in thinking about resilience, we don't want to take the focus off of environmental resilience and the community response that is needed to help make safety real.
Yeah. And the other question is resilience the same as pushing through? right?
Salud.
And how do you find your truth in what you need and what you want in your life? I'm curious as to how are you feeling right now in your body as we're talking about this?
I think Dr. Chattery was going to say something.
Thank you.
Yes.
No, I just wanted to say, to me, resilience means like how macho you are and how tough you are and how resistant you are to be taken down by some event or somebody, something like that.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Do we have any others who would like to add to the discussion today?
Allison,
Yeah.
do you mind if I pick on you?
We'd love to hear from you. Your
Oh,
voice.
sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I think about pushing through and just kind of moving on and carrying on and being there for everybody else and doing all the things you need to do in your various work and family roles. And but I really have to say, during this pandemic, when it's so overwhelming for such an extended period of time, I'm really stopping to think about, how do we just get past, and I'm a coach, I'm an executive coach and work with a lot of people in the system. So I'd love your perspectives on this, but I've been asking myself the question lately, how can I not only help my clients, but help myself move beyond this mindset of mere surviving and going to thriving and actually feeling good. And it's like one thing if you think you're like in a big push for a few weeks or a month, it's quite another if it's going to be another year or two. So how do we get into the thriving mindset?
Yeah. I'll give you an example. It's an anonymous story. There was a doctor by the name of X and had been working in the ER from the start of COVID. She had a family member who was at home with an autoimmune disease and had decided that it was in the best interest of their family to rent another apartment to reduce the impact of the spreading of the virus. Dr. X was both committed to her patients and also her family, but Dr. X also was neglecting how she felt, the loss of having to put so many others before herself and feeling frustrated by the inability to have control over a lot of aspects of her life. She felt compounded by the trauma due to the multiple roles that she had, both in her family, in her community, and her work. And so one thing that I did in working with Dr. X was checking in to the expert of who she is. And so because the multiple roles that we have, we're always taking care of everyone else, and they tend to come first. And so what does it mean to check in with the expert in our own lives? Like, we are the experts of our lives and we know what we need when we need it. It's sometimes we just need to check in with ourselves to say, hey, what do I need right now? You know, do I need to take a rest? Do I need to eat? I've been going for the last 24 hours and just constantly working to support others. But what have I done for myself lately, literally? And that moves us from just surviving to thriving, because we're now both not only taking care of others, but we're taking care of ourselves and our needs. And that takes practice as well.
Thank you. And we will keep on coming to your observations and your questions. And thank you for bringing in this point of when we are in survival mode, and this is why we pulled up this definition right now for psychological trauma, then attending to self-care is extra challenging. Right? So in our working definition of psychological trauma from the US Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, we can say individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances that is experienced as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on functioning and all aspects of being human: mental, physical, social, emotional, spiritual well-being. Sometimes we have thought of trauma as an event, something that has a beginning and an end. And I invite your comments in the chat about what stands out to you as particularly important in this understanding of trauma, or if you see that anything is missing. And then want to share another layer and response to this idea from Resma Menachem, who is in Minneapolis and is a clinician working with community trauma, racialized trauma, and law enforcement stress. And he says trauma is not a flaw or a weakness. It is a highly effective tool of safety and survival. It is also not an event. It is the body's protective response to an event or a series of events that it perceives as potentially dangerous. And again, invite you, what is your response here? What stands out to you here? So our frame is normal responses to abnormal circumstances. Our body wants to keep us safe, and when it gets the message that there may be danger, threat to life, whether that is empirically or factually established, or whether that's the body's perception, it's not a choice. It's our survival instinct. And so, you know, of course, in the HHC system, in the communities that we are working in, trauma is not only brought on by the pandemic that we're living through. So in the seas that we swim in, we could say that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is not the accurate way to describe what many folks are surviving with, that there's not post, that the P stands for persistent or pervasive. And the work of Dr. Howard Pinderhughes in community violence, community prevention, community resilience is also very powerful and relevant for this moment. And then in response to this, Dr. Sean Ginwright, who works with youth and is reframing the trauma-informed care movement to a healing-centered engagement framework, says if trauma is collectively experienced, this means that we have to consider the environmental context that caused the harm in the first place. By only treating the individual, we only address part of the equation, leaving the toxic systems, policies, and practices neatly intact. So one of the impacts of trauma when we are in survival mode is a feeling of not having choice, a feeling of not having efficacy. So part of what self-care and community care in a context of trauma is about is helping each other remember, or helping each other tap into those things, those movements that are larger than ourselves. And that brings us to the Adverse Childhood Experiences movement, ACEs. If you're familiar with ACEs, would love to see that handy hand raise function that we've got in Zoom, or just to have you chime in and say that you have heard of the ACEs movement. So a highly recommended book and also TED Talk by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. This is her, she's now the Surgeon General of California. This is a movement to recognize that whether or not we've put a name on it or a diagnosis of it, that many adults, if not most adults, and particularly most adults in the systems that we are working in, are survivors of complex childhood trauma or adverse childhood experiences, and that has an impact on health, on emotional health, on what we know as life functioning, and that experience is not destiny. That knowledge is power, and that by sharing a framework of understanding the multifaceted healing that we want all people to have access to, that we play a part in creating a world that is safe. So I'd like to show you a 2-minute video. Some people may have seen this already. This is Dr. Daniel Siegel, who is well known for many things, among them inventing a quick way to describe how the brain functions when under stress. So I invite you to take a look at this video and think about how you might apply the down-to-earth way that he's explaining this in your own life, whether it's with your own self-talk, with your colleagues, with your patients, with your kids, with your partners. So deep breath and...
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child, and that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
Yeah. Responses to that, welcome in the chat. And here on this slide is another way of understanding normal human responses to overwhelming stress. And in a diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis related to trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, these symptoms that we see here in the middle, they are long-lasting. But today we're not talking about diagnosis. We're talking about the human response. And so when we're in survival mode, being barraged by stimuli or not being able to control disturbing images, thoughts, memories, it's normal and human that we try to get relief in whatever ways might work, whether that's tuning out, whether that's even using substances, whether it's creating drama in our lives, whether it is engaging in familiar patterns. Being on high alert in fight, flight, or freeze mode doesn't necessarily mean we're walking around with a label that says, hi, I'm having a trauma response. It means being quick to anger or difficulty managing change at work or at home, or as Dr. Siegel said, can even affect moral reasoning. So if we hold this in mind,
And so I'll go into depth about complex and compound trauma. Complex and compound trauma is usually interpersonal. It occurs between people. It involves being or feeling trapped. It's often planned, extreme, ongoing, and or repeated. And so there are layers to it. It doesn't give us a chance to heal. Often we have, it's more severe, persistent, and cumulative. It involves challenges with shame, trust, self-esteem, identity, and regulating emotions. So there's an interpersonal component, and has different coping strategies. These tools include alcohol and drug use, self-harm, over or under eating, and being or feeling the need to overwork constantly. And so there's systems of re-traumatization. It affects emotional and physical health, well-being, relationships, and daily functioning. And as we were talking earlier about checking into you as the expert in who you are, you know, we have to create a culture within your organization around checking in and what that looks like, a system of community care, acknowledging what we need, what we may see in others that they may need, and being able to have a process or opportunity to process those feelings, like taking a break, slowing things down from regular day to day, and taking steps to actualize our actual needs in support of processing, so that what we're going through is not compounded or piled on top of each other and we're feeling out of control. Our own histories of trauma compounded with our professional experiences relates to vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is complex, and it feels like you are just piling on your responsibilities, the responsibilities to your patients, to your family, and to yourself. However, it feels like you're imploding because you keep going and you never take or acknowledge your feelings and how your body's responding to the vicarious trauma that you're experiencing. And so as you see here, the impact of vicarious trauma, it can mirror similar to primary trauma in that it's intrusive. We can't stop thinking about it. It impacts our professional identity because we want to seem like we have it all together. We want to keep pushing through and working hard. And it may impact, we may not want to say it does, but it may impact our work performance or our ability to take care of ourselves or trust others to do what they need to do. We may feel like we're on high alert or constantly in danger mode or feeling fear that something bad is going to happen. Our health is impacted. We may be neglectful on our own medical needs. And so again, we may be avoidant, trying to get relief from feeling overwhelmed and feeling overwhelming empathy for the patients that we serve, rather than really taking a step back and taking care of, what do I need here? You know, how can I incorporate my faith and my spirituality? How can I incorporate me time in a time where I'm taking care of others constantly or worried about others constantly? Thank you. And so we are wired to connect through feelings. That's who we are. We bear witness to love, joy, sadness, and pain. We connect naturally to one another, our families, our children, our parents. And there's, you know, strategies to help us to slow down and to connect with one another in ways that best meet our needs, so that we're not having our emotions implode on us and we're not able to really live fulfilling lives. And thank you.
So vicarious trauma, normal response to abnormal circumstances. As clinicians, especially in this time, there are experiences of new primary trauma. There may be triggers for past primary trauma, and there's holding the trauma that patients and others are confronting. And so that's the double-edged sword of being a healer, being a helper, that we're nothing without empathy. It's the strength that allows us to help others, and yet it is a weight that takes a toll. And I'm just checking the comments here, the chat. Okay.
Allison stated, I've had people describe how responses to trauma can be adaptive in the current situation, but when that response becomes habitual over the long term, it can become quite maladaptive. I saw that as recent as yesterday when a patient was having strong COVID-like symptoms, but was too afraid to go get the care on her own. How would you advise people dealing with these lasting PTS symptoms that are interfering with their current physical and mental well-being? Yeah.
Thank you. So as we move into thinking and talking about coping strategies and coping skills, an underlying principle is that the part of our brain that we need to access those skills, either to access coping skills that have worked well for us in the past or try new ones, it is that thinking, learning part of the brain. And so if we're in survival mode, then we need to get ourselves to a place or help create an environment of feeling safe enough. It may not be total safety, but safe enough to let that thinking and learning brain come online. And so and Allison, thank you again for that question. For people who are on the front lines of helping others to access their inner expert, or to consider accessing treatment, or to make tough decisions about quarantine, or confront issues or concerns that they may be having with their children. In order to be able to do that and to be that thought partner, it's also about checking in with where are we? Are we on autopilot, or are we able to be aware of our body and our brain? So a definition for vicarious trauma is empathy overload. If you think of trauma as information, vicarious trauma is information overload. There is a limit to what we are able to take in and process. When we combine this with the fact that each of us comes to this work with our own stressors and often our own trauma histories, it's clear why our bodies and minds fill up to the brink of what they can handle. And invite your reflections and comments about this idea that there is a limit. Many of us, we come in with diverse experiences, and we may have been taught to have a limit is a luxury. What are some inner messages that we have, right?
I would love to see that in the comments. What are our thoughts around that?
So as we come to that, we're swimming in a soup. We discussed how you may be experiencing primary trauma, vicarious trauma, and burnout all at once. Or you may not, or you may be experiencing one more than another at different times through time. But one of the reasons that it's helpful to recognize the difference and how primary trauma, vicarious trauma, and burnout are distinguished is to get to the root cause. So primary trauma, for example, can be triggered in a work situation by an experience in a patient or in someone who you are seeking to help, but the cause is the direct experience that personally you may have had. In contrast, vicarious or indirect trauma is a unique and universal workplace hazard. So who is vulnerable or who is susceptible to vicarious trauma? I want to see in the chat or into yourself, everyone and anyone. And this is something to remind ourselves of. And in burnout is a mismatch between the expectations of a job and the realities of a job. Systems can be traumatizing. Systems are traumatizing. And even if we had everything that we needed, all the resources that we needed, all the funding that we needed, and our working experiences were more pleasant, there would still be that reality of vicarious trauma. So when we think about, you can't fix everything at once. What are some priorities? What are the things that are most causing distress at a given point in time? So with all that, and we're about to get to a self-assessment where you'll have some time to reflect and more time to come in. There's also secondary resilience, vicarious resilience, a field about which there's growing awareness, and would love to hear if this resonates for you. So here's a quote from a participant in a study that was actually of international workers responding to torture survivors. Being on the front lines of supporting those who survive trauma generates a positive change as you generally become more resourceful, less fearful, more dynamic, more resolute, more active and eager to question yourself permanently. In other words, you develop your potential. Responses to that? What part of the brain needs to be online in order to tap into making those connections? The thinking and learning brain, we got to be safe enough. So, are you ready for a few minutes of self-assessment? Love to see the thumbs up in the chat. Okay. Thank you. This is an excerpt from a validated scale used internationally called the Professional Quality of Life Scale that gets both to compassion satisfaction, vicarious trauma, and vicarious resilience. So we'd like to ask you to just settle back, and you don't need to share any of this, just think to yourself or jot down your response. For each phrase that I read, give yourself a score from 1 to 5 for how often you experience these things in the last 30 days. 1, never, 5, very often. If you're reading the screen, please feel free to mute me or turn me down. If you are not seeing the screen, I'm going to read them out loud so that you can hear them. First statement, I am preoccupied with the people I help. Haven't felt this at all in the past 30 days, feeling it all the time, 5. And first choice, best choice, please don't overthink, just note to yourself. Number 2, I get satisfaction from being able to help people. 1, I haven't felt this way at all over the last 30 days. 5, all the time. Next statement. I jump or am startled by unexpected sounds. 1, not happening at all. 5, all the time. Next statement. I have beliefs that sustain me. 1, not feeling this at all over the last 30 days. 5, all the time. Next statement. I avoid certain activities or situations because they remind me of frightening, my apologies, please bear with me. I avoid certain activities or situations because they remind me of frightening experiences of the people I help. 1, not feeling this at all over the last 30 days. 5, all the time. Next statement. I am the person I always wanted to be. 1, not feeling that at all. 5, feeling it all the time. Next statement. I feel overwhelmed because my caseload seems endless. or my patient load, or my workload seems endless. 1, not feeling this at all. 5, constantly. Next question. I believe I can make a difference through my work. 1, not feeling this at all. 5, all the time. Next question. I find it difficult to separate my personal life from my life as a helper. 1, not experiencing this at all. Through 5, I'm having this difficulty all the time. And last question for now. I am happy that I chose to do this work. Not feeling that at all, a 1. Feeling it all the time, a 5. So please take a good deep breath. Notice how you're feeling in your body. Move around in your chair or in the space. Feel your feet on the floor or touch something solid, whether it's a table, a wall. And again, we invite your reflection. You don't have to disclose anything unless you'd like to. What we want to emphasize is that this assessment is a moment in time assessment. I take it all the time and it changes. You may choose to use it as a tool for areas that you want to maintain or change. You may choose to bring it into conversation with colleagues or with teams. And just to help us kind of be able to take a temperature check in community, we're going to launch the next poll. Lisa, could you launch poll 2, please? Thank you. So if you're listening and not able to see, the options for this poll are, what are your learnings from this assessment? I was surprised by some of my responses in a positive way. I was surprised by some of my responses in a negative way. I think doing self-assessments like this on a regular basis would be helpful for me. I'm interested in discussing with my team at work. And last item, I could see bringing this up in supervision with my supervisor. So we're seeing these polls come in. We're seeing a few responses. I was surprised in a negative way. I'm just going to keep this up for about 20 more seconds as we see some responses coming in. Thank you for the question, Tuhina. Is there a scale for total points on the questions? There is, and this is, it's validated data. You will get this in a handout, and we're also going to look at an app. And so that's coming in a few minutes. And how do you know if you are doing okay? Put this out to the group too. What is okay?
I would like for everyone to take a moment and just put your hands on your heart right now.
Yeah.
And I want you to notice what sensations you're feeling in your body. Oftentimes, trauma disconnects us from our body and we are on autopilot. But what if the gift was to go back in and to really notice what we're feeling right now in this moment? Pay attention to, what do you need? Often that question is not asked, or we don't ask ourselves that question. What is it that you need in this moment? If you are up to sharing in the chat, we would welcome that, so we can connect to you and join in that way.
As we share in the chat, I'm going to end the polling and share the results. And this is interesting, right? So reflections. And I know I identify very much with people who might be thinking or have said, well, I want to know how does my score relate to others? And assuring you again, like there is a way to get that information, but how hard is it to use ourselves as the benchmark, right? So what do you make of this observation that in the poll, we've got the majority of folks saying that doing self-assessments like this would be helpful, and that we did not have folks saying, I'm interested in discussing with my team or in bringing up with supervision. And again, I think it's real and normal. There's no judgment at all. What do you make of this? We'll keep moving. I'm going to stop the share results, but these will also be available post. And this is part of an ongoing discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. And so, what does resilience mean when traumatic stress seems relentless? Can you be resilient and hurting at the same time? How do you advocate for your needs and the needs of others at the same time? And this is connected to the poll that we just took. You know, are we holding all of this in? Do we trust that others around us can take care of us? Do we trust our own ourselves as experts to take care of ourselves? So I'll tell you a little story before we move on. I remember one case that kept me up at night. It was an 8-year-old girl who had just disclosed to her mother that she had been molested by her uncle for the past 3 years, consistently after school. My heart broke. I felt anger and the urge to protect her, but helpless that I couldn't. I had to be mindful that this was not my trauma to bear, that I was merely a tool to provide strategies of support to the family and this young girl. I couldn't help but to wonder what her outcomes would be. Like in relationships with others, I worried about her mother's, brothers, and mother's own mental health. It reminded me of my own trauma. I realized that I needed to check in with someone other than relying on myself. I checked in with my supervisor. I got a therapist. I realized I didn't have to do it all on my own. And that resilience, the idea of bouncing back, meant that I had a host of people that were there to hold my trampoline. And so, in what ways have you spoken about what you've been dealing with, through, or going through, in a way that speaks to your truth? In response to vicarious trauma, we often work more. I'm guilty of it. I've worked maybe 80 hours in a week. A way of getting my mind off of what I'm actually thinking or feeling in my body. And so what would it mean to be curious about what you're noticing? To take a step back and connect and ask yourself the question, am I safe? Give yourself permission to allow others to step in and take care of you as you are caring for others. And so the resilience strategies for sustained helping work is authentically connecting with others, telling people how we really feel and being honest about it. Recognizing that we are part of something bigger than ourselves, and it's not just us that is holding it up. And being able to ground ourselves, not only in the moment, but also as long-term practice. And that speaks to Allison's earlier question around sustainment and long-term. You know, trauma is not an event, it's reoccurring. And so our practices in coping and managing have to be also long-term. Thank you.
And with that, we want to invite you to interact in another poll. Lisa, could you put up the third poll, please? And the list that you'll see on this poll, it's of course not exhaustive. It's examples of things that many people have experienced as helpful, but there's not one size fits all. We just like to take an anonymous poll around what are some things that you've tried? Doesn't mean that you're necessarily always keeping them up, but what have you tried? And we also want to be aware of a habit that many of us might have around judging our self-care. Are we self-caring enough, or being bad, right, for not keeping up with self-care? And we want to practice self-compassion. Some self-care is painful self-care. Some self-care is luxurious self-care. Diversified strategies are an important part of sustaining for the long haul in this work, in our careers. And feeling that we have a sense of choice in our work, in our careers, is also an important strategy. Again, swimming in the soup of trauma takes away our ability to feel that we have choice. And so there are conscious strategies to help us get in touch and claim that choice.
Yeah.
Oh. So in case we've got folks who are listening, here are the options. And you will also be getting handouts that have all of this and more, and kind of a checklist for yourself. So what have you tried? Practicing grounding techniques, getting out into nature, having a check-in buddy, either inside or outside of work, creating an end of the workday ritual or the work night ritual to create a boundary between home and work, finding a therapist I feel comfortable working with, artistic expression, regularly exercising, being part of a spiritual community, practicing setting boundaries, and more. I'm just going to share the results that we have so far and invite people to continue to share in the chat. And what we see here is that we've got a good majority who are doing regularly exercising. Love to hear what's helping to make that possible.
Yeah.
We see a good diversity. So now let's get real, and I'm going to ask Lisa, could you please pull up the next poll? Thank you. And what gets in the way?
Yeah.
Right? There is no limit, and I'm sure you've heard it, of all the podcasts or teachers or magazines or articles or media saying all the great things about self-care and coping strategies. But like with any change, getting habits and practices is challenged. So to normalize this, we want to ask you, which of the following gets in the way of your using coping strategies? I feel like I'm constantly in crisis mode and can't slow down. There is not enough time in the day. everybody wants something from me, no time for myself. I can't find the privacy I need. I just haven't found strategies that work for me. I don't want others to know that I'm not okay. Other people judge the way I cope. I feel like if I don't get it perfect, what's the point? I'm going to go ahead, close the polling, share the results, and see that all of our respondents said, I feel like I'm in crisis mode and can't slow down. Take a breath. There is no judgment. That's a shared challenge. And so that's exactly what we want to take in as we start to bring our session to a close. Here we've got an opportunity in the chat or for you to unmute yourself. Real world, what coping strategies have been working for you? And what helps you remember to tap into your coping strategies? I have a colleague who, when I see on Zoom meetings, they have quotes that you can see on the wall behind them with mantras. Like one I remember is, let the past be in the past. And I found that helpful to think about visual reminders.
I have a question. How do you not feel guilty about not putting other people first so that you do coping strategies? Like when you're so overwhelmed, how do you give yourself permission? What can you say to yourself? I mean, maybe I'm answering my own question, but like it's okay, you need to do this to be better at helping others. I don't know, I'd love to hear other reactions from participants.
Yeah.
Manage that.
Yeah, Tahina, I think you are tapping into your expert, the expert you know, like I need to do this in order for me to be my best self for other people. You know, I always think of the analogy of going on a plane, and in the event that something happens, I have to be able to put my mask on first before I'm able to support anyone else. Like I have to be breathing, like literally breathing in a calm manner before I'm able to support anybody, or don't feel like, you know, I'm asphyxiated. The other piece is that I am not in it alone, that the world, you know, there are multiple people that can help me and support me, and I don't have to do it all by myself. And so it's not just me, but I have a multitude of support that can also bear the weight, and I don't have to bear the weight on my own. And so that helps with the guilt. But I'm curious about others tapping into their own expertise in themselves and checking in with themselves around what will be supportive in times when they feel like they're going and they need to slow down, but it feels like they can't.
Guilt is really powerful, and for each person, it may come from a different source, or it may be more prominent for some than for others. So a personal check-in or something, you know, to do with a therapist or with a counselor or with a colleague is, or with a journal, is thinking about, what does guilt represent? What are some of the beliefs, deeply held beliefs, that might be getting in the way of feeling okay about putting ourselves first? And So I want to share with you a cool reminder opportunity that actually could let you queue up some of these strategies or some of the individualized kinds of thoughts or habits that you want to get into. So the Provider Resilience app is available for free on iPhones and Android. It is created by the Department of Veterans Affairs. So thinking about frontline almost being in a war. So here's what it looks like. And what it does is actually has an online or a phone-based compassion satisfaction assessment that you can take. So the full version of the self-assessment that we took, you can take on the app, and it's private. And I'm sharing with you vulnerably that this was my resilience rating yesterday. It will show you where you are in the ratings. It also prompts you to count down to your next vacation. And so here's an example of how the readout would look. And it prompts you to take it. It sends you reminders. And then it also lets you choose to be reminded to do what they call resilience builders or resilience breakers. And you can add your own as well. So even if that's a mantra, like I'm going to, allow myself not to be guilty and take 3 deep breaths. Another cool feature is it's got a bunch of images, quotes, strategies, meditations. This is one of my favorites, no feeling is final, and it lets you add your quotes here. Melissa, I'm going to add what you just said about trampoline, having a lot of people to hold my trampoline. I love that.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm sorry.
There's a couple of things in the chat box.
Oh, great, thank you.
We can read them. Lisa says, sometimes just reminding myself that starting the self-care is harder than doing it. Just getting to the yoga mat means I will do it. That's the hardest part. So not feeling like it stops mattering if I can just push through that by remembering that I will feel better after self-care. The app is very cool. Araceli says, wow, this is awesome. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Great. So we have here a few resources to put into your arsenal or your toolbox. Vibrant also has a lot of great resources. And there's a webinar that's being offered now that is by an organization called Lumos Transforms that's based on the West Coast, that was founded by Nkem Indefo, who is a nurse. And these are virtual workshops attended by a variety of people that have really practical, trauma-informed, embodied tools. And I have found for many folks I've known, it's a low demand way to get in touch with awareness of stress and trauma in your body. And so we know that you've also got recommendations, and this is about mutual sharing. So please do share, and we're sending all of this to you. And again, this may be information that has already come to you, but just to have all in one place, there are a number of hotlines that are available and real words that we've heard. I've felt heard and not judged. I wish I had called sooner. The counselor helped me think through my options. So with this,
I want to thank you so much. Thank you so much who are on the call for giving us your time, your energy, your wisdom. And we would like to ask you one word that you are, how you're feeling right now, if you can enter that into the chat. If words are not coming, if you can select the weather, like how are you feeling right now if you were the weather? And so we have some stuff coming in. Wow, inspired, grateful. Also raises many questions. Hopeful. Humid, storm impending. I'm grateful. Anyone else that we haven't heard from? Nice to have an hour to think about this.
Can I ask for the slides to be put up again? So I just want to give everybody the CME code.
Yes.
And we open this up for any questions, comments, please. You all have so much experience in all this. We would love to hear from you. You can unmute. You can send in something into the chat. We have a few minutes. Yeah.
Thanks. I would love to ask a question. It's Allison. So I completely could relate to that question about the guilt when you know, about not putting somebody else first. But I have almost the opposite problem because I'm like the ultimate empath that you were talking about with the virtual trauma before. When I was just sitting at my desk the other day, feeling like I wanted to cry my eyes out. And it took me a while to figure out that it was somebody else's emotions I was feeling. And it happens to me a lot. And I wonder if you have any strategies about creating those healthy boundaries, or some people call it cutting cords from other people's emotions. But do you have any advice about how to recognize that other people's emotions before you start feeling them like your own?
Yeah. One thing I, would think about when that's coming up is like, what is impacting me the most right now? Because we are, and what I'm hearing from you, and when we talk about being empathic, it means that you're connected vulnerably with others, connected in a way that you want the best for them, and you also feel what they're going through. And part of that is, acknowledging that what they're going through is tough and it's hard. And the difference here is that, it's hard to disconnect from that connection. I think it's recognizing that you are human, you are connected, humanely to what someone else is experiencing, and feeling the sorrow for them, but not taking it on as if it's your own. And that takes time. To one, recognize it, one, process it, and one, to release it. One strategy is to write down what you're experiencing right now, put it in a bowl of water and wash it away. So it's not a severe cut, but it's like acknowledgement, but also letting the water and the tears flow and disappear as the writings disappear. Because it's you're letting it go in that way. How does that sound, Allison?
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I agree it's going to take practice, because for me, the issue is that I felt the feeling sort of, I think by the time I noticed it, I was so far separated from the activity that stimulated it, I didn't even know where it was coming from. So I thought they were my emotions. And oftentimes I got plenty to cry about. So, it didn't really occur to me, but I was sitting there, I happened to be in my office just working on my work, and nothing had happened to me so in that particular day, which was recent, I was able to identify that I was holding on to somebody else's emotions, but that was new for me. And You know, and I'm just curious if you have general advice for empaths, because those boundaries are hard to enforce when you're feeling other people's emotions and you're feeling them in your body, you know, and not so, you know, cognitively aware of what's going on until much later.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
One of the reasons that the practice is so important is to get it into our muscles. So practicing even when we're not feeling overwhelmed or activated, we want to build that muscle memory. One of the handouts that you'll get is, it's actually from a curriculum called Seeking Safety, that has a whole array of grounding techniques. The idea with grounding is that it lets us get in touch with the here and now. And as you said, it's very hard to be in the here and now when you're running and when you're attuned and when you're being empathic. And the other thing just to notice with the pain of empathy is that what we often might see as like losing empathy or as becoming callous or even overly bureaucratic, that often vicarious trauma is a part of that response, that's a protective response.
Yeah, that's really interesting. This has been wonderful. I'm grateful to all of you for making this possible, and you've given me lots to think about and practice. I'm going to get my bowl of water ready soon.
You know, I just want to add one thing. I used to work with clinical social workers a lot, and they are required to have supervision every week about cases so that they have a way to talk to somebody about the cases and share and not keep everything in and have a third party, you know, offer opinion, advice. So I always think about that's like a requirement for them. I wish that was a requirement for everybody. You know, you need to speak to somebody and share.
Yeah.
It's not most of us, but.
Yeah. Thank you, Tahina. That really, and I think from my perspective, it really lets me feel like I'm not in it by myself, and that it's shared responsibility, whether versus sole responsibility.
Right, I'm going to wrap this up. I just want to remind people that if you are looking for CMEs, and this works for nurses or any other type of CME you're looking for, if you go in and sign in and use this code 07KELP, you will get a certificate showing that you have spent 1.5 hours in this program. And this is good for physicians, anybody. So please, in the next 24 hours, text to 828-295-1144, text in 07KELP, or visit eeds.com or EEDS on your iPhone. One more slide, please. Next slide. I want to thank you all. This was brought to you by the Pagny Health and Research Foundation. And we were able, thanks to you and some great funders, to raise money to have programs like this. So our gratitude to you as well. And we hope you continue to join us for future programs. And if you could fill out the evaluation when it comes, we would really appreciate that, so we can know how to, make sure our programs are getting you what you need. So thank you again, everybody who came. This has been a wonderful session. And we'll see you. You want to talk about the next session quickly, September 9th, Elizabeth?
Sure. Melissa and I will be back to discuss this very topic of vicarious trauma in supervision. So really excited to be able to bring this even more into a organizational context. Please spread the word.
Yeah,
And
please spread the word. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.